The road into southern Germany was almost silent on the morning of April 22, 1945. Burned-out trucks stood beside shattered trees. Smoke still drifted above the hills, even though the fighting had already moved farther east. Then, an American reconnaissance jeep stopped without warning. One soldier stepped out and noticed something strange near the edge of a small forest. A white cloth was hanging from a broken branch.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
It was not a surrender flag. It was marked with a red cross. The men walked closer. A few seconds later, every sound seemed to disappear. Lying on the cold ground was a young Red Cross nurse. Her medical bag had been torn open. Bandages were scattered across the dirt. She had not died in the middle of a battle. Someone had placed her there on purpose. The soldiers looked at each other without saying a word. They knew this was not just another casualty of war. This was something different. Within hours, word began moving through the advancing columns of General George S. Patton's Third Army. Before sunset, officers wanted one question answered. Who had done this, and why? The answer did not come from the battlefield. It came from people who had survived. Each person remembered something different. None of them knew the full story. Like broken pieces of glass, every memory reflected only part of the truth. Only when those pieces came together would the final picture appear. The first witness was not a soldier. She was an elderly German woman named Anna Keller, who lived in a small farmhouse outside the village of Oberammergau. Before the war, her family had raised cattle and grown potatoes. By the spring of 1945, most of the fields had become empty. Her husband had died years earlier, and her only son had disappeared on the Eastern Front. She had learned to survive by staying quiet and avoiding soldiers from both sides. When American military police questioned her, Anna spoke slowly. She remembered seeing a young woman wearing a white armband with the Red Cross emblem just after sunrise the previous day. The nurse had been walking beside a horse-drawn wagon carrying wounded German soldiers. Anna found that unusual. The nurse did not appear frightened. Instead, she looked tired. She stopped near the farmhouse to ask for water. Anna handed her a small bucket from the well. The nurse thanked her with a weak smile before checking the condition of one wounded soldier whose arm was wrapped in blood-soaked cloth. Anna noticed something else. The nurse spoke both English and German. She used calm words with every injured man, no matter which uniform he wore. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 German military vehicles appeared from the Western Road. One carried several armed soldiers. The second transported an officer wearing the black uniform of the SS. Anna could not hear every word, but she saw the officer step toward the nurse. His face remained cold while he questioned her papers. The nurse stood her ground. She pointed toward the wounded men, trying to explain her mission. Then the officer suddenly ordered his soldiers to separate her from the wagon. Anna became frightened and closed the farmhouse door. She watched through a narrow crack in the wooden wall. The nurse was placed beside the road while the wounded soldiers remained helpless on the wagon. Nobody resisted. Nobody fired a weapon. The officer appeared more interested in accusing her than listening. The old woman never saw what happened next. She heard an engine start. She heard boots moving across gravel. Then the convoy disappeared into the trees. By evening, the road had become empty again. Military investigators wrote every detail into their reports. But Anna had not witnessed the execution itself. She only saw the beginning. The second witness was found 2 days later inside a temporary prisoner collection point. He was a 19-year-old German infantryman named Karl Fiser. He had surrendered after his unit collapsed near the Ammer River. Unlike many prisoners, Karl answered questions without hesitation. His voice shook as he remembered the events. Carl explained that his company had been ordered to fall back toward the Alps while American armored units pushed forward with incredible speed. Fuel was almost gone. Food was running out. Radio communication had become unreliable. Officers were nervous because rumors spread that anyone showing weakness could be accused of cowardice. During the retreat, Karl's unit crossed paths with an SS security detachment commanded by an officer named Hauptsturmführer Otto Weiss. Karl remembered the name because everyone feared him. Weiss had built a reputation for strict discipline and absolute loyalty to orders. Soldiers whispered that he had personally executed deserters during earlier campaigns. Karl never served under Weiss directly. But on that afternoon, both groups stopped near a crossroads where the Red Cross wagon waited. Karl saw the nurse treating a wounded German corporal whose leg had been shattered by artillery fragments. She ignored the approaching vehicles because her attention remained fixed on the injured man. Weiss climbed out of his staff car and immediately demanded identification. Karl could not hear every sentence, but he heard one accusation clearly. Weiss believed the nurse had provided medical assistance to captured American prisoners earlier that week. To him, that was proof she had betrayed Germany. The accusation made little sense. Under the international laws of war, medical personnel were expected to care for wounded soldiers regardless of nationality. But by April 1945, discipline inside many isolated German units had broken down. Some officers ignored those rules completely. Karl watched as Weiss ordered 2 guards to search the nurse's medical bag. Inside they found blood plasma, morphine syringes, surgical scissors, medical records, and identification papers. Nothing suggested espionage. Still, Weiss remained unconvinced. The nurse continued speaking calmly. Karl later admitted that he admired her courage. Even surrounded by armed soldiers, she never appeared to panic. She simply repeated that wounded men needed treatment immediately. The interrogation lasted several minutes before Weiss ordered everyone except his own guards away from the road. Karl obeyed. He walked nearly 200 meters before hearing a single rifle shot behind him. He stopped. No second shot followed. Nobody said anything. The convoy started moving again. Karl never turned around. When American investigators asked why he had remained silent, tears filled his eyes. He answered with complete honesty. By then, anyone who questioned an SS officer risked joining the next execution. Investigators now possessed 2 accounts. Both described the same officer. Both confirmed the nurse had been alive shortly before disappearing. But neither witness had actually seen the final moments. The mystery only deepened. The third witness appeared unexpectedly. His name was Private First Class James Walker of the U.S. Army Medical Department. He belonged to an evacuation team following closely behind Patton's armored spearheads. His unit entered the area only hours after German forces abandoned it. Walker was among the first Americans to examine the body. Years later, he still remembered every detail. The nurse wore a Red Cross armband that remained clearly visible despite the mud covering her uniform. Her medical satchel lay open beside her. Valuable supplies had not been stolen. Her identification papers were still present. There were no signs of artillery damage nearby, no shell craters, no burned vehicles, no destroyed buildings. Everything suggested she had been deliberately brought to that isolated location. Walker immediately realized something else. The wound came from close range. This had not been random battlefield fire. Someone had stood only a short distance away. Military police carefully photographed the scene before removing the body. Every footprint, tire mark, and cartridge case became evidence. Nearby, they found fresh vehicle tracks matching German military transport tires leading toward a narrow forest road. By evening, intelligence officers connected the reports from Anna Keller, Carl Fisher, and Walker. 3 witnesses who had never met each other described the same sequence. A Red Cross nurse had been stopped. An SS officer had questioned her. She had disappeared. Later, her body was discovered. Still missing was the most important witness of all, someone who had been there until the very end. As Patton's Third Army continued driving deeper into Bavaria, investigators raced against time. German units were collapsing everywhere. Prisoners filled temporary camps by the thousands. Every passing day increased the chance that the officer responsible would vanish into the growing sea of defeated soldiers. Then, on April 24, military police received unexpected information from another captured German who claimed he had seen everything. For the first time, the final minutes of the nurse's life were about to be revealed. On the morning of April 24, 1945, American military police brought another German prisoner into a temporary command post near the advancing front. His name was Wilhelm Brawn, a 32-year-old truck driver attached to an SS transport company. Unlike the previous witnesses, Brawn had remained silent after his capture. Only after hearing that several other prisoners had already spoken did he finally agree to tell his story. He looked exhausted. His uniform was covered with dust, and his hands shook as he accepted a cup of coffee from an American guard. Before saying a single word, he quietly admitted that he had carried something for years that he would never forget. Brawn explained that his transport truck had been traveling only a short distance behind the convoy commanded by Hauptsturmführer Otto Weiss. The roads were crowded with retreating soldiers, civilian wagons, abandoned equipment, and damaged vehicles. American aircraft had been attacking roads throughout the day, forcing everyone to move quickly whenever the skies became quiet. Around midday, Weiss ordered every vehicle to stop beside a narrow forest road. Brawn watched from less than 50 meters away. The young Red Cross nurse was brought forward under armed guard. Her hands were not tied. She still carried herself with remarkable calm. Even after hours of questioning, she continued insisting that her only duty was caring for wounded men. Brawn remembered seeing several injured German soldiers watching helplessly from the wagon she had been traveling with. None of them could even stand. Their expressions showed fear, but also disbelief. They knew exactly who had been treating their wounds only hours earlier. Brawn said Weiss accused the nurse once again of helping enemy soldiers. The accusation grew louder each minute. The nurse answered without raising her voice. She explained that medical workers treated the wounded regardless of nationality. Those were the rules she had sworn to follow. Brawn admitted he could not remember every sentence, but he never forgot the silence that followed. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Then Weiss made his decision. He ordered everyone except 2 guards to step back. Brawn lowered his eyes because he already knew what was about to happen. Seconds later, a single rifle shot echoed through the trees. No battle was taking place nearby. No artillery fired. Only one shot broke the silence. When Brawn looked up again, the nurse had fallen beside the road. Weiss gave a short order, climbed back into his staff car, and the convoy drove away as if nothing had happened. No burial party remained behind. No report was written. No marker was placed. The body was simply left where it had fallen. Brawn confessed that he had wanted to stop and cover the body before leaving, but fear controlled every man in the convoy. During the final weeks of the war, questioning an SS officer could mean immediate execution. He carried that guilt with him until the day he surrendered to American forces. The investigators now had the complete sequence. 4 witnesses. 4 independent stories. Each one matched the others. The evidence pointed toward the same officer and the same crime. The case was forwarded through military channels as American units continued pushing east under General George S. Patton's command. Patton himself was leading one of the fastest advances of the war. His Third Army crossed rivers, seized towns, and accepted the surrender of thousands of exhausted German soldiers every day. Speed mattered because every hour of delay allowed more enemy units to escape toward the mountains. Yet reports involving possible war crimes received immediate attention. Military police, intelligence officers, and judge-advocate investigators began comparing prisoner lists, captured documents, and vehicle records, hoping to locate Otto Weiss before he disappeared among the countless defeated troops. The search proved difficult. Germany in late April 1945 was collapsing faster than anyone could fully understand. Entire divisions surrendered without orders. Officers removed their insignia. Vehicles were abandoned along roadsides. Records were burned. Some men tried to disappear into civilian clothing before American forces reached them. Every captured prisoner became another possible clue. Several days later, investigators questioned a German signals operator who remembered transmitting movement orders for Weiss's detachment. Another prisoner identified the staff car that had traveled with the convoy. Tire impressions collected at the execution site matched the type of vehicle described by multiple witnesses. One by one, the pieces continued fitting together. Eventually, American forces located a group of surrendered SS personnel near the foothills of the Alps. Among them stood a man whose name appeared repeatedly throughout the investigation. Otto Weiss denied every accusation placed before him. He claimed the nurse had been killed during crossfire with advancing American troops. The physical evidence did not support his version. There had been no shell impacts, no bullet damage to nearby trees, no signs of combat. The testimony from multiple eyewitnesses contradicted him in nearly every important detail. Military investigators completed their reports while the war in Europe approached its final days. Whether every individual responsible ultimately faced formal punishment remains difficult to establish today because countless wartime records disappeared during Germany's collapse. Some files were destroyed deliberately. Others vanished during the confusion that followed the surrender. Historians often encounter gaps where complete certainty is no longer possible. What remains certain is something much larger than the fate of one officer. Medical personnel served under the protection of international law throughout the war. Doctors, nurses, and medics accepted extraordinary risks because they treated wounded people instead of carrying rifles into battle. Thousands of them from every nation crossed dangerous ground with only medical bags and Red Cross markings for protection. Many never returned home. As American forces continued advancing across Germany, they uncovered concentration camps, hidden prisons, execution sites, and countless other crimes that had remained concealed behind the front lines. Each discovery reminded soldiers that victory meant more than capturing territory. It also meant uncovering the truth. For many men serving under Patton, the memory of the unidentified nurse remained personal. Army medics understood that battlefield medicine depended on trust. A wounded soldier never asked whether the person placing a bandage belonged to his hometown or even his own country. He only hoped someone would arrive before it was too late. That simple act of humanity stood above uniforms, languages, and national borders. Private First Class James Walker later admitted that he never forgot the scene beneath the trees. During every patient he treated after the war, he remembered the scattered bandages, the open medical satchel, and the white armband marked with the Red Cross. Those images stayed with him far longer than any battlefield victory. Anna Keller returned to her quiet farmhouse after the fighting ended. For years she walked the same road where the convoy had stopped. Wildflowers eventually covered the ground, and new trees grew where military vehicles once passed. Travelers crossing the area would never guess what had happened there during those desperate days of April 1945. Yet Anna remembered every detail until the end of her life. Carl Fischer carried his own burden. He often wondered whether one shouted protest would have changed anything. Deep inside, he knew the answer was probably no. A frightened 19-year-old private could never have stopped armed SS guards. Even so, the question never completely disappeared. War leaves many survivors asking impossible questions that can never truly be answered. Wilhelm Brawn also spent years remembering that single rifle shot echoing through the forest. He understood that silence can become its own kind of prison. Speaking to investigators did not erase what he had witnessed, but it ensured that the victim would not simply vanish from history without anyone telling her story. The final lesson reaches beyond one battlefield and one tragic afternoon. Wars are often remembered through famous generals, massive offensives, and decisive victories. Yet history is also shaped by ordinary people whose names rarely appear in books. A nurse carrying medical supplies, a farmer watching through a cracked wooden wall, a frightened young private ordered to keep walking, a medic kneeling beside a body in the quiet after battle. Their memories preserved a truth that might otherwise have disappeared forever. You can almost feel the cold wind moving through those trees as the American convoy finally arrived. The guns were moving east. The battle was almost over. But for the soldiers who stopped beside that lonely road, victory carried a heavy silence. They could not change what had already happened. What they could do was record the evidence, listen to the witnesses, and make sure the story survived. Because battles decide who wins a war. But remembering the people who chose humanity in the middle of that war is what gives history its meaning.